Welcome back, everyone, to Dial the Gates, the Stargate Oral History Project. My name is David Reed. I appreciate you joining me for this episode. I am thrilled to be welcomed by writer and story editor Ron Wilkerson, who is responsible for a number of some of my very favorite SG-1 episodes. Ron, it is a treat to have you. Apologies again for taking so long to get you on the show. That is totally my fault. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
It's such a pleasure. You and Robert C. Cooper are working on something right
Yeah.
now, and it's something that has been going a pretty far ways back, but I'm curious if you would be willing to share what that is on this show and update us as to what's going on right now.
Well, it's not sci-fi, but it's
Sure.
a fascinating story. It's we're writing really the story of the golden age of Hollywood, is centered around a guy who shares my last name, Billy Wilkerson, and he's the guy that started the Hollywood Reporter in 1930. And
But there's no relation, right?
Actually, no. There's no relation between him
Wow.
and me. However, we're doing it with the connection to his son, Willie Wilkerson, who was introduced to me by a mutual friend about 10 years ago. And she said, you're both interested in the same kind of things. You have the same last name. Why don't you know each other? And,
Right.
we're as different as chalk and cheese. He grew up in Brentwood in a mansion. I grew up the son of a milkman in Buffalo, New York. So we're a little different backgrounds, but we hit it off very well. And he started telling me about his dad. And his father, Billy Wilkerson, is one of the most fascinating people in Hollywood. He was born in 1890, got into the film business in the very early days, hustling film cans up and down the East Coast from theater to theater. Got involved in music or in media publishing in New York, and then just thought he would start a magazine. And he came to West Coast and started the Hollywood Reporter. And he was the first publisher to actually write about the ins and outs of the industry, which pleased a lot of people and didn't please a lot of others, namely the studio moguls who didn't want, their dirty laundry or their stories even told in public. And so he made enemies of some and friends of others. He was kind of an enemy of Louis B. Mayer, but he was good friends with Joe Schenck, who ran 20th Century Fox, and Harry Cohn, who ran Columbia, and various other people in the industry. But he played a major part in discovering people like Clark Gable, Lana Turner, and he also was heavily involved with the mob because going back to his New York days, he ran up Speakeasy, and one of his suppliers was just Mayor Lansky, and Bugsy Siegel were his suppliers of booze at his speakeasies in New York. And when he came to the West Coast, they were still friends. And he was involved with Johnny Roselli, who was one of the top mob figures in Hollywood and influenced in the studios. And he was also an inveterate gambler. And I'm kind of encapsulating his whole story in a little bit. But he actually started Las Vegas because he would go to Las Vegas on gambling trips. And one of the studio guys said to him, if you're going to lose that kind of money at the tables, own the house. And he decided, yeah, okay. Also he started the Sunset Strip. He started Cafe Vendome, which is no longer there, but also started the Trocadero, which became one of the Hollywood hotspots in the 30s and 40s. Cafe Ciro's. These are all things that he, based from his speakeasy experience, he really imported that to Hollywood and started these Hollywood hotspots. And then likewise, he saw Vegas as an opportunity, and he got financing for a hotel called the Flamingo. And he
My
ran out of money
gosh.
building the Flamingo, and the mob came to him and said, "Here's $1 million. You finish your project. You just got a partner, and his name is Bugsy Siegel." And so, I mean, this guy's got a fascinating story over like 30, 40 years of Hollywood. And so it came to me through his son, Willie, who had written a nonfiction bio of his dad. And I just I said, this is too big for one story. I said, it's the TV series. And so I wrote up a pilot script. I thought, how can I get this thing out in the public? And I called my friend Rob Cooper, who said, at the moment I'm leaving Stargate and I'm looking for some interesting projects. Let's talk about this. So he and I, he and I rewrote the pilot script that I had written, and then we got our agent involved and just took it out and we sold it. We sold it eventually to ABC, who bought it as a pilot, and it got right to the top of ABC. And what happens sometimes in pilots is they don't get produced, and that's what
Right.
happened to us. So we've now turned it into the first of a series of novels, and that novel is going to be coming out this year, whether it's going to be a book publisher or self-published. We're done with it. It's just a matter of how it's getting it out there, and so that's where we're at with it.
How many books do you have an idea that you'll
I've
pursue?
written book one and book two, and I'm now plotting book three, and there's at least 4 or 5 books.
4 or 5
This
total.
guy's got a
Wow.
big story, and
Well, that's the
it's
thing, Ron.
what's so
I'm
fascinating is it involves all of these major players from a different point of view, the point of view of an outsider. We look at Billy as the outsider to the whole studio industry. It's like the kid looking onto the playground and wanting to be part of it, but being rejected by the studios. He wanted to be a filmmaker, and he produced a short film and took it around town, and nobody wanted it. And that's why he decided to go into the publishing business and write their stories. And it's fascinating because all of his stuff is available. I have access to all of the guy wrote a column every day called Trade Views about Hollywood, and the stuff is available through the Academy. And so I've been reading the Hollywood Reporter now for the past 10 years, but in the
wow.
1930s. It's just fascinating stuff. So that's my most recent project with Rob Cooper.
What I'm thrilled that you guys are developing this thing. It's something that I would be interested in watching, regardless of whether or not it's sci-fi. I'm curious as to what you think about. Hollywood has never had a problem telling stories about Hollywood. Why do you think this guy's story has never been properly told? It's certainly
Well,
interesting enough. You got all kinds of
well,
scandal. You got the mafia. You got movies.
Well, okay. There's another side to it that I haven't related to, and it's to me it's not controversial, but I think in the realm of Hollywood it is controversial. Is that this guy was a very fierce anti-communist. He had traveled to Russia shortly after the revolution, and he saw what it was like. And so when things started getting into the Hollywood industry,
Mm,
when writers who had communist affiliation started putting their spin into Hollywood films, he outed them. And I think that, in point of fact, he never testified at the House Committee on Un-American Activities, but he certainly would have championed it. And that he was a fierce anti-communist, and it's not, always popular to be anti-communist, I guess, in Hollywood. And so that's, I think, part of why he's not really, his story hasn't been told, is that. But that really came much later in his career. That came in 46, 47, in that era.
wow. If the um, if the books catch fire, would you be interested in pursuing turning around and adapting material again?
Oh, I'd love it. I think it would be really very well told as a as a TV series. And we really plotted out the first season when we went around and we started selling the project to Hollywood. We plotted out a good 8, 10 episodes. And that was only really, the years 1930 through 1932. So we've got tons of material. So
And
it's really its own IP, I think, in an
wow.
era that just hasn't been like the story of Gable, for example, is a fantastic story. Is that he made Gable a star on a bet with Louis B. Mayer. It's like, my magazine is so influential that pick any of these headshots off your desk. I'll make them a star. Sign them now while they're cheap. And he wrote this amazing editorial on Mr. Exhibitor, watch out for Gable. He's going to be the next thing. And it was a bet. And he proved to Louis Mayer that he could make a star out of a nobody. And that's just one of the stories that this guy is about. So
This
that's
is
our
wild to
that's
me.
our story, and it would make a great TV series. And who knows? we're up for anything at this point. We're very excited about the project, and it's a great human story. It's a story of, and at the moment our title is well, we started out with the title of Dreamland, and now well, I can't. It's not really worth developing what we're talking about, but it's a great story.
How long have you wanted to write for television and film, and when did that get started for you?
Yeah, it's I have to dip back into my history, I guess, a bit to get into
Yeah.
that. I'm like half musician, half writer. I think I started out really in the music business as a player. I started out as a teenager playing music. I dropped out of college to become a musician, and played in bands for a good long time and starved. And my first work experience was in upstate New York. When I'm from Buffalo, and the company I worked with in upstate New York was called MXR. I don't know if you know anything about musical instruments, but they made phase shifters, little guitar effects. And we were kids. We were in our early 20s, and the thing just took off like a rocket. And my work experience was I eventually became head of sales of the company. And so I was literally in my early 20s traveling the world on a gold American Express card. It was fortunate. And I got involved in the music industry and kept playing.
What'd you
And
play?
what's that?
What'd you play?
I play keyboards. So if you look at my work setup, here's my work setup. Here's my writing part with the keyboard, and down below that is
There's
my
your other keyboard.
keyboard. Yeah. So this is my life. I have one half here, the other half there. But and then I got transferred to California by a company called Roland. I worked for Roland, which is a keyboard synthesizer Japanese company. I was head of marketing at that company for quite a while, and they brought me to the West Coast. Now, I'd always been a movie fan. I'd always loved sci-fi. I grew up watching The Twilight Zone, watching Star Trek, watching anything that was remotely sci-fi. So uh, I was a fan of that stuff. So when I got to the West Coast, it didn't just do sales. I was mainly working in marketing and advertising, and so I learned to write because I was writing about music, and I was hiring ad agencies, and they didn't know how to write about music, and so I ended up writing this stuff myself. And so I'm totally self-taught as a writer, but I just got used to exercising that muscle of getting things from my head onto the page. Over the years, I was writing ads, I was writing catalogs, press releases, TV ads, radio ads, that kind of stuff. And then when I got to the West Coast, uh, I split off from Roland and started an ad agency that I ran for about 10 years, doing ads in the music industry, also in the computer industry. And that allowed me the freedom to write creatively. And you get to the West Coast, you get to Hollywood, and I got bit by the bug. I mean, I moved here in the early '80s, and it was a great time to get bit by the movie bug because great movies, '80s and '90s was a really, really golden age as far as I'm concerned of TV and movies. And I just thought, I can do that. Oh, Star Trek: The Next Generation came on, and in my hubris, I thought, well, this is a great show. I love the production values. I love the cast, but the writing, you know, I can do that. In my hubris, I thought I can do that. So I took some classes at UCLA Extension as in screenwriting, and these are UCLA Extension is probably the best screenwriting program in the country because it's taught by people who have been writers. You can't be an instructor at Extension unless you've sold your stuff in Hollywood. And so I learned from people who had written film and TV. And I loved it. And I had a goal within 3 years I had a goal of writing for Star Trek. And within 3 years, I had sold my first episodes to Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I sold them a bunch, I guess 8 episodes all told on Next Generation. Most of them aired. A few of them were bought but didn't get made for one reason or another. But I had a comfortable working relationship with them. And then gradually, as things changed, I really loved working with Jerry Taylor, who was supervising producer on Star Trek: The Next Generation, and Mike Piller, who was the showrunner, the executive producer. They were great people. And some of the other writers I had good relationships with, some of them not as good. But that changed when they went to Voyager. And the network just decided to kill Next Generation purely for economic reasons, as far as I know, that the actors were just getting paid too much. And they thought, well, we can do this with a whole new cast and they'll be cheaper. So let's do it. And so they started Voyager, or they started Deep Space Nine. I never really pitched Deep Space Nine, but because Next Gen was still in production. Then
Hmm.
Voyager came along, and what happened is I wrote a couple, 3 or 4 episodes for Voyager, and then Jerry Taylor left. My
Correct.
main connection, my mentor, really had left Voyager, and she just retired. And Brandon Braga took it over. And I didn't really have as good a relationship with the show at that point. And I wasn't pitching directly to Brandon. I was pitching further and further down the totem pole as time went on. I thought, well, this is not good. And then my last sale to Star Trek Voyager was a show called Ashes to Ashes that I just thought they really did not execute my concept, is the nice way of saying it.
Was it supposed to be Ensign Jatal? I've been wanting to ask you that for a long time. There was an episode earlier in the show where the Doctor just absolutely crumbled after having killed. I think she was an ensign, Ani Jatal, and this Lindsay Ballard person comes in from the middle of the nowhere. Was it supposed to be Jatal, and they just couldn't get her
No, it
hired?
wasn't. But it's interesting you mentioned the Doctor, because the Doctor was actually part of my story. Was that they brought back these 2 characters that had been revived by this alien race,
Mm.
and the whole, I like to deal in ethical concepts that are
Hmm.
difficult for our heroes, because the thing is with television, you can't really kill your main cast,
Right.
and even if you kill them, you're going to bring them back in a half an hour. So what you have to do, though, to make it interesting is you can put them in ethical dilemmas. And my ethical dilemma on this particular episode was, what if you have 2 people who were integral to your ship? You may have even, I even fashioned that Tom Paris, the pilot, had a relationship with this woman who we brought back. And what if people who have died, you've mourned them, they're gone from your life, and all of a sudden they're back? Now what? You've moved on, and all of a sudden you've got these people back. And likewise, I brought back the ship's doctor. And so what is our holodoc? You know,
Ah.
what's he going to do? We got a real guy there now who has been reconstructed by an alien race, and we don't really need holodoc anymore now, do we? And so those, I thought, were really interesting ethical moments that they just made a hash out of, as
So
far as
these
I'm
folks
concerned.
died
And
on the crossing into the Delta Quadrant. They must have spent a really long time catching up to the ship.
yeah, well, yeah,
Wow.
I'm, those are the mechanical ins and outs of it that I wasn't too concerned about. Other
Hmm.
aliens have technology that can do whatever it needs to do for that episode. So whatever, that was
This
not
just
my
the
concern.
Star
My
Trek fan is
concern,
just going to town with his head here. Oh, how did that work? So
but
I apologize.
my concern was really the characters and getting into the
Yeah.
characters. And it's all of a sudden you've got people back who they don't fit anymore, and they're creating problems on the. So anyway, I thought that was a great concept, but it didn't come through that way in the episode. And so I started looking around, and at that time I had been watching Stargate on Showtime, and I thought, this show is turning into something here. It was
Yeah.
I had watched a couple of seasons of it, 2, 3 seasons of it, and it was really starting to find its footing. Uh, the production values were getting better and better. The cast was getting more comfortable in their roles, and Rick was really becoming O'Neill in a whole different way from Kurt Russell, and he became a character that we just loved. I thought
Very
Amanda was
complex.
great. Chris was
Yeah.
great. Michael was great. I mean, the cast really came together, like the Beatles. It's just like 4
It's
characters that
true.
really fit together beautifully. And I love the theme show, and I love the production values. And I thought it was a great show. I called my agent and said, "Get me on this show." He said, "No, no way. They're Canadian. They don't
Why?
want an American writer."
Oh.
And I said, "Come on, get me on the show." I won't send anything up there. It's a waste of my time. And I thought, this is stupid. I want to get on the show. So I looked on the credits, and this is the cue to any writers who want to get into a show. look for the script coordinator in the closing credits of the show. The script coordinator is usually the secretary to the writer's room. And I looked up, and it was a girl named Kathann Ambrose, and I wrote her name down,
That's
and
correct.
I checked the show. I, did all my research, found the phone numbers, called them up. I'd like to speak to Kathann. Who's calling? Ron Wilkerson. I'm a writer. I've written for Star Trek. Oh, interesting. And she was great. And she said, send up your stuff. I said, my agent said, no, she said, don't worry about that. We want to look at new writers. We're happy. And she was great. I loved Kathann.
And you wrote Star Trek, and Brad especially loved Star Trek.
Well, he had pitched Star Trek and never sold Star Trek, which I thought was kind of interesting. Anyway, so I sent up one of my original screenplays, and it was, a feature screenplay, 120 pages, and it sat on Brad's desk. And I called him after a couple of weeks. Said, Brad, look, no, he hasn't had a chance to look at it. Do you have anything shorter? Oh, I'll send up one of my Star Trek scripts. So I sent that up. Well, do you have it? No, 2 weeks, nothing. And he said, is there anything shorter? He's really busy. And I said, okay. I had, as luck would have it, I had written a script for a TV show called Back in Black that was on MTV or VH1. And it was basically a show that ran only a couple episodes and never really got produced beyond that. But I had written a killer episode for him. The show concept of the show was rock and roll meets the Twilight Zone. So it was supposed to be all these stories about the supernatural intersecting with the world of rock and roll. I thought, cool. And came up with this one story that I just absolutely loved. It's called Border Radio. And it's about a musician driving in the desert, in the middle of the night, in the mountains, between LA and Las Vegas. And he's flipping radio stations, and he hears a new song by Chuck Berry after Berry's passing, or he hears a new song by John Lennon, or what? It's like, what the hell? And he's tuned into Heaven's Radio, and I love the story. And so I wrote up this 28-page story, and it got through. They were going to produce it, and then all of a sudden the show got canceled. So this happens. So I had this kicking around. I said, why don't I send this up to Brad? And I sent it up to Brad. Next thing I know, I had a meeting. And so I was used to pitching, so I kind of knew how to pitch shows and stories, but I had never pitched like I had pitched Stargate, and I pitched them on the phone, me in LA, them sitting around a speakerphone in one of the conference rooms. And I had prepared pitches for the stories. And I had this one story that I thought was, I have 3 stories all prepared, or 2 stories or something like that prepared, that I thought were really good. And I thought, God, I need another one. And I had this story called Red Sky that I had pitched it to Voyager, didn't go. I had pitched it to the Outer Limits, didn't go. I can't remember can't remember who it was. And I thought, this is okay. Maybe I can find a way to deal with this. And so I reconfigured it and made it a story about Stargate and how, we go to these planets and somehow our wormhole goes through their corona of their sun and kind of messes up their sun. And it was an idea that I got really just by flipping through the pages of an encyclopedia and looking at, hey, here's the light spectrum. And here's what we get. The visible light is the white light that's in between red, ultra infrared on one end and ultraviolet on the other end. And anything, if it shifts too far one way or the other, we don't, basically life on the planet evaporates because it can't survive. I thought, this is a great story. So I pitched it, and Brad and Rob and I think Joe and Paul were also in the meeting, and they liked it, and they said, fine, let's do a deal. So I wrote up the story, which is something that they don't do on Next Generation and all the Star Trek shows. They had a process where you go from the pitch to what we call a story outline, which is the telling of the story. Some people call it a treatment. A telling of the story in paragraph form. That's about 5 pages double spaced. And I sent that up to Brad, and he said, "What's this?" We don't do this on Stargate. Where's the beat sheet? You sold us on the pitch. So I wrote the beat sheet, which is a telling of the story in, basically sequence of scene after scene after scene. And I sent that up, and they said, great, we love it. We want you to write the script. And so get on it. And midway through the writing of the script process, they decided I needed to come up there and be on staff. And so they made me an offer. And next thing I know, I'm on a plane to Vancouver.
Fantastic. Had season 5 begun filming yet when you had?
Yeah, they had filmed a couple
Okay.
of episodes, but they hadn't.
Okay.
I think they were in like 2 or 3 episodes in.
Okay. I love this idea. Did you come up with the dialing computer being the reason that we poison Katao's son? Or was
Well,
that something that the
yeah,
boys did?
no, yeah, it's something I came up with along the way. Is once you sell the concept, you're just like, well,
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to make it work?
Mm-hmm.
And how are you gonna fix it back was even the bigger problem. But that once you sell a concept to a TV show, then you got to figure out all those ins and outs of how to make the concept into a logical show.
What about the Asgard? Was that a part of your original idea?
Yeah, yeah.
I love
Well,
the
I
Asgard.
had picked a planet that had the Asgard as their guardian angel, more or less, and that's where the whole Nordic thing came from, because obviously that's they played with that previously in a couple episodes. I can't remember the episodes outside of mine at the moment, but
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was a fun thing. I liked those people, and then one thing led to another, and there you go.
This is one of my favorite episodes to reflect on in terms of stories in the Stargate pantheon that have real moral edges to them, where you it's easy to do a right versus wrong story,
Mhm.
but what if I find the wrong versus wrong options or the right versus right options to be the more interesting ones, because the characters are stuck and there is
Mhm.
nothing that they can do.
Right,
We created our own dialing computer because we didn't have our a DHD that was discovered
right,
with the Egyptian gate, and so,
right.
like Sam says in this episode to Freyr, we're still experimenting. I
Yeah,
see. Well, now we've got this problem. You've poisoned a star, and
yeah.
you have a group of people who are not willing to leave their home. And one of the best moments, in my opinion, in the series is when one of the people of Katao, or a band of these thugs, blow up our rocket,
Yeah,
and O'Neill's ready to blow this guy's head off.
yeah,
That
right.
is one of the best acting moments by Rick, and it's just one of those that we just sit back and watch. We've done this to these people. They're fighting back. This is a great show, Ron.
Thank you. I'm proud of it. I don't know if I'm telling tales out of school, but and I wasn't on that particular set, so I don't know. But I talked to Martin Wood, and Rick at that time was going through some personal issues that were difficult, and I know Martin said use that anger, and that's a lot of where that came from. That at that time his
Wow.
personal life there was issues. I don't even
Mm-hmm.
know what they are, frankly, but
Mm-hmm.
but Martin said, Rick, use it. And that's where that came. It's a hell of a performance. He
Wow.
was on the edge.
Was there
I loved it.
ever
Loved the moment.
was there ever a treatment that you did for Red Sky where the Katao people and their son died? Or was
Well,
it
no,
always going to end with, okay,
no.
well, the Asgard really did it, but they can't tell us because technically we're under the planet's treaty and
Well,
we
and
interact with the Goa'uld
that's my
sometimes.
own little interpretation. Did the Asgard
Yeah.
do it, or did someone else? And I think that maybe it was someone else. And
Really?
yeah, that's my interpretation of it.
I'm getting goosebumps, man.
It's
That's
a
you have to
higher
understand.
power,
This story is one of the closest to my heart in terms
Glad,
of
glad to hear
the
that.
show. So I didn't think of it that way. That I just assumed that the Asgard went and did it. But
Well,
what if
did the
something
Asgard
else
do it, or
was?
did our seeding of the sun's corona actually pay off, or did there
Yeah, the
another hand that
Maclarium.
was above us all? I got to
Yeah,
tell the
Sam
story
says
about
I'm pretty sure
Maclarium.
we didn't do this, sir. Yeah,
I got to
okay.
tell a story about Maclarium because it's
Yes, please.
important to me. Uh, I'm not a scientist. I'm a writer. I'm a musician. I'm a regular guy who has ethical ideas. When you get into the science, I reach for help. And
For sure.
one of my friends who became a friend through Star Trek, was a guy named Duncan MacLaren, who is a molecular
Okay.
biologist who was working at UCLA at that time, and he's a brilliant guy, and still one of my friends. And I said, Duncan, what the hell am I going to do? How am I going to get out of this? And he said, you can seed the sun, and just sprinkle it with a little bit of pollution that might cause a chemical reaction to occur. And, he came up with the idea of this heavy metal that was created in the lab, and he gave that to me. And that's why I created Maclarium. But Dr. MacLaren, named after my friend Duncan MacLaren, is the guy that created this heavy metal that sprinkled. And did the Maclarium do it? Did the Asgard do it, or was it a higher
Did
power than
something
either of
else.
them? So there
Yeah,
you go.
the chat's lighting up. It's the ancients. No, the ancients don't interfere. They don't care. This is great. Folks, if you're in the live stream right now and you have a question for Ron, go ahead and get it over to me. That's wild. There are some great beats in that episode. Just watching Rick deal with the High Council. Rick has always had a special relationship with the puppets. Like he loves interacting with them because they don't really talk back, know, and I don't think that that's necessarily the reason, but he's just always loved the puppets. Yeah. So you get him a chance to.
One of my first interactions on the show when I first walked in and took an office at Burnaby was seeing Thor laying there on the floor in a little mini casket.
Isn't that weird? That is the strangest thing, this black casket. And he's got one box of him and one box for parts.
Yep.
Oh,
that was
man.
Great. That was great.
No, very cool. So you were not on set for that production?
I was actually.
You were?
The first time, yeah. I got to tell you, this is to anybody who wants to be a writer. This was a big moment for me because, okay, you're right. The stuff I had written previously for Star Trek, mostly it was created and standing sets within the ship and what have you. But for this episode, I got to create the Howe Village and the people in that civilization, and that was a major part of the look of the show. And so I wrote that up in the script of what it should look like. And then I had only been there a couple of weeks working on various projects in the Burnaby office. And they said, well, they're shooting Red Sky. You want to go have a look at it? And it was in a separate production facility in another part of town that was basically like an industrial space. It was a big, long industrial space.
Oh, the bicycle factory, Norco.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's where the village set was.
That's what it was. And I walked into it, and it's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
This came out of my head, and now I'm walking through the city square that came out of my head. And I'm looking at the actors and the actresses and these outfits, and it's like, something that was in my head is now fully realized physically in front of me, and it was a phenomenal experience. It was just great. And I went to Christina McQuarrie, the costume designer, after the show, or actually I got back from Burnaby or wherever it was, Norco. And I told her, I said, I'm really impressed with what you did with the costuming on the show. She said, what? I said, I'm the writer. I'm really impressed. And she said, no writer has ever said that to me before. I said, really? And she was like blown away, I guess. And or maybe she was kidding. I don't know. But I mean, that to me, that was the best experience of Red Sky, was just walking into seeing this thing that was to me in my head, then on the page, and now it's in reality. But people work so hard to get that stuff right. It's astounding to me.
It's amazing what they can pull off on an episode budget. I mean, at that point, I think it was somewhere around $2 million.
I know.
If that, for an episode of TV, and it's just these little moral tales that make us go outside of ourselves for a little while and take us away to another world. In this case, they're so cool. A part of me has always wondered what it would have been like had this been an episode that would have aired a few seasons later. They went darker with SG-1, and it's one of those where had this aired in season 8 or 9, those people would not have made it. And Stargate was in a different headspace seasons 3, 4, and 5, where they were more willing to is not the word I want, but it's the one I'm going to go with to play it a little bit. And safer is not the word I want. The more willing to have a happier ending here that is more ambiguous, but is essentially they dodged a bullet, as it were. But just watching the characters deal with the fact that they narrowly killed these people. And Sam brings it up later in the 7th season, how humbling that was, that, you can't, you're just gallivanting through the universe. There are consequences to even just opening that gate.
Well, that's really the heart of the episode for me, and I thought that was the ethical and moral dilemma that was most interesting to explore. Was that we're traveling around and we're very cavalier about the way we go about things very often, and these poor people. I mean, they were like not a heavily industrialized society. They were being protected, even though they didn't realize they were being protected. But they had a god that was protecting them, and all of a sudden things failed, and they saw their world ending. And it was, I mean, actually the part, there were a couple things that were funny about it, is that for some reason, I think it was Michael Greenberg that decided to flip Act 3 and 4. And the bit where they go to the church to try and convince people to move to the other planet, that was earlier. And it was more of a comedy scene. It was really supposed to be a lot funnier than it was. And it would have been funnier if it had stayed where it was in the original script, because I basically had Daniel and Teal trying to sell this world on, hey, this is a lot better place, and it's got waterfalls, and you're gonna love it. That was what that scene was supposed to be. Yeah, but
wow.
And they could just see that they weren't really making a very good sale job of it.
No, this is incredibly
but it worked out. I mean, the episode worked out as it was. So the only thing, actually, my only beef with the episode, frankly, I don't think the lighting guys quite got the beginning right, because it was far too yellow in the beginning. It should have been like baby blue, light. It should have just been colorful as all get out. And it was they went for intensity, and they went for, oh man, it's awful bright, put on the sunglasses. That wasn't my intention. My intention was the spectrum changed, not just
completely different.
And it's what can I say? It was my first gig at Stargate. I wasn't going to knock on the door of the lighting guys and say, no, you got it wrong.
I think one of my favorite beats in this entire episode is O'Neill's F it moment. Hell with it. I'm just going to tell these people what their gods are.
Yeah.
He gets on a box and he says, your gods, you think that they're awesome. And then he ends it with, and I get chills even when I'm thinking about the line, these beings had the power to help you. They chose not to.
Yeah.
And you tell that to a person of faith, how do you expect them to respond? I mean, granted, they've incorporated you into their mythology. You are these beings who come through that either wish us good tidings or carry us into our doom. But you can't just do that to a people. But it's still it's a hell of a scene.
Yep.
Man.
Yep.
Red sky. And you've got you sent me this piece of concept art. I wanted to share this with everybody. I'm sharing it on the screen right now. O'Neill in the Asgard Council chamber. That's a piece of artwork by
I had some
Heron.
of the production drawings that Brad gave me on the various projects that I worked on, and to me they're just fun to have, and I thought you'd enjoy seeing them. Absolutely.
Thank you for that, sir. I am interested in talking a little bit about Between Two Fires.
Sure.
The Tolan are one of my favorite races, and they were always. You did indeed. They were always impervious, and we hadn't seen them really for a couple of years. They made it very clear that their technology was far superior to ours. They made it very, very clear that because of what happened with their previous planet, they had no intention of giving us any of it. And all of a sudden in this episode, we're being presented with some of the most powerful hardware, having no idea that it's completely useless now.
Yeah.
But tell me about Between Two Fires.
Well, that's what sold the pitch, to be honest. I mean, by this time, I was on staff. I had been brought up to Canada. I had been there about a month, and we'd been through the edits on Red Sky and had gone into production. That was great. And it's like, well, Ron, now what? And I was still digesting the show, and I was watching 2, 3, 4 episodes a day in my office, trying to just understand, because there are things that I hadn't seen when I came up there. And I got fascinated by the Tolans too, and I liked the character Narim. I thought he was a really interesting
Yeah.
character,
Darwin's
and
great.
I liked the actor, and I thought this we haven't done anything with these guys. Why not? And so basically, I came up with the idea of what if the Tolans somehow suddenly became vulnerable to the Goa'uld, and what would happen? Okay, and there comes the ethical dilemma. Between two fires is we have characters, and not really our characters so much, but it's really the Chancellor Travell and also Narim are each between their own two fires. Travell is between the ethics of, hey, we don't sell our technology to anybody, and hey, we're facing annihilation by the Goa'uld. And so what choice does she make? Narim is likewise between that ethical and ostracization by his society, ostracism, whatever it would be. And so each of them is in a place that's really difficult. And I thought that was a fascinating place to be. And admittedly, it isn't as much of an ethical issue for our people. For our people, it's like, hey, we're going to get these great ion cannons. Let's go for it, and we're going to give them that. What is it, tritium? I think
we'll start mining some off world for them.
Yeah. And so for us, it wasn't really the central issue, but it was really convincing Narim to be true to his values. And that's really what we were all about. And we also had kind of an interplay of a relationship between Narim and Carter. In that, he truly was inspired by her at the very least. And so I liked that, and I played with that. And then again, I thought that episode went very well. It was my first episode fully on staff on the show, from concept all the way through execution. And I was able to, watch the process and interact with the process in a way that I hadn't yet had the opportunity to on Red Sky. And that, one of the things I gotta say, well, I'll save that for Proving Ground when we talk about that. The different idea about my experience on staff. But it was,
notate it so you don't skip it.
Yeah.
Later on. But it brought you on what now?
I'll get into it. But it's it's the first episode I had on staff from beginning to end, and the process was very smooth on that. I don't recall any real bugs whatsoever. I got to meet, I can't remember the name of the actor who played Narim, but he's a good guy.
Darwin Sanford.
Yeah, that's right. And I liked his work, and I thought he was spectacular in the episode. And Travell, I thought she was terrific in the episode too. And the shooting, I think it was at Simon Fraser University is where they shot it, and beautiful architecture. It really fit with that whole Tolan society. The only thing that I didn't get was the funeral for Omak. My concept was that flame that they had. I wanted his image to be rendered through CGI in the flame. I thought that would have been really cool, and it got nixed because if you put the image of the character, you got to pay him.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Like, no,
so it was never.
We don't do that.
I had always wondered.
So when they watch that episode, look at the flame, and you're going to see Omak in there because he should have been there.
I was always wondering if it was your intent to bring back that actor. So it was never.
Well, my intention was to bring him back, at least in that, so that the audience would have a reference point. Because we talk a lot about Omak, and unless you're a real fan of the show, you're not necessarily going to remember the actor who played that. So that was twofold. I just thought it would be a cool effect, and I also thought it would help the audience remember his story, that he was the one we interacted with mostly in the previous episode. So
that's a fair point, for sure.
But I liked the episode a lot. I watched it recently, and I love the sound of those ion cannons and good stuff.
Yes, and the Goa'uld pummeling us from space.
This
was the first.
The final scene of Narim standing as the city behind him is being destroyed.
Torched.
I mean, this is the man who is dying for his ethics. This is a pretty exciting thing.
Yeah,
That's very dramatic television as far as I'm concerned.
there's a line in relation to the Toland that Jack has in season 3, I think it is. When the Gould finally, because they haven't like taken every opportunity to take technology, including from the Toland by theft at this point. When the Gould finally show up and start wiping us out, I'm sure we'll all feel great about ourselves and our moral standards. And
Yes.
Narim actually does it.
Yeah, he does it. Yeah,
Huh.
that's a pretty noble thing. And
Yeah,
what
it's
happened to
kind of
them after
wild.
that? I don't know. Were they destroyed? They didn't come back,
In
unfortunately.
the 100th episode party,
Hmm.
I'm sure if it's Greenberg or Wood who approached Garwin. He was there for it, and they said, "We have this idea to bring you back."
Oh, is that right? I
Um,
can't remember that.
and he was supposed
Was
to
that
come back.
Wormhole Extreme?
Yeah, he was there for the 100th
Okay.
episode party. Yeah,
Yeah.
for the party on the stage, and
Yeah.
they said, "We have this idea to bring
I
you
was in
back."
that.
Yes, yeah, you
Okay.
got a phone to your ear, don't you? With
Yes,
the
I do.
MGM executives.
No, I'm a studio gopher. I thought I was some kind of second in command or third in command, and I was with the head of the studio, Hank Cohn.
That's right.
In his limousine. And
You
when
know
that
what the
car
show
drove
really
off, it almost
needs?
when that car drove off, it almost took off my right foot. I mean, the door closed so quickly.
Wow. Jeez, man. Yeah, he's repeating his line from the previous season. In terms of getting one of a specific actor on the show. You know what the show really needs is a sexy female alien, and he agreed to reprise it for the series.
Yes, of course, of course.
That's wild.
Fun episode.
No, great episode. But yeah, Narim was supposed to come back for another episode later on, and it just never did pan out. But
Yeah, that happens.
I've got, let me see here, Proving Ground, and I think I have a question. General Maximus, Proving Ground is one of my favorite SG-1 episodes, and Haley is one of my favorite characters in the franchise. Can you tell us about Proving Ground?
Fun from start to finish. I love the episode. I watched it the other night. It's like I haven't seen it in years, and I'm very proud of that episode. Okay, first of all, I had sold an episode to Star Trek: The Next Generation called Lower Decks, and it was well received. Mike Pillar said it was the best episode of the final season, and he loved it. And I it goes back to an early episode of the original series on Star Trek. I think it was the episode um, Balance of Terror was the name of it, something like that. It was a Romulan episode. The beginning of the
Mhm.
episode is Kirk officiating a wedding between a
Mhm.
husband and a wife. And somewhere during the course of the episode, the husband is killed. And at the end of the episode, Kirk has to console the widow. She's
Mhm.
been married 3 days, and all of a sudden she's a widow. That was very powerful to me. And I always
Mhm.
thought, what about the red shirts? What about these little people? We see them in the background. They got lives too. Let's hear about them. And so my concept in Lower Decks was, what's it like to work for Worf? What's it like to work for Riker, to be his underling? What's it like to be a guy just like Riker, only Riker hates you? What's it like to
One
be,
L is or one I is all that's necessary. Man, every
and
time I
so
hear
I
this, like,
thought,
dude, come on.
and the other thing too is, as I said previously, you're working on a series, you got a regular cast, and you're not going to kill any of them off. You can put them in
Yeah.
moral jeopardy, but you can't. I mean, physical jeopardy, you always know they're going to get better. If they get a disease, they're going to get healed, whatever, because they're cast members. But what about the little people? And that episode of Star Trek original series stuck with me, and I thought, let's do something with these characters. And that's so when we took the characters that we put together in Lower Decks, I pulled different characters that would interact with different of our regular cast members. And
Mhm.
I took one of them from a previous episode, Ensign Cito, who
Cito.
had already had a fan surrounding or fan fave. And I thought, well, she's a great character to deal with. What if we put her in a dangerous situation? What if she doesn't make it? Wow, what do we? It was tough on the actor, but it was a great role, and it really cemented that whole concept of, hey, we're dealing with real people here. This is not just playtime. This is real missions out there in a real scary world, universe in which anything can happen. And so that likewise, when we were searching for something, I was my next episode. You finish Between Two Fires. Hey, great, Ron. What's next? It's always like, what's the next thing? And I I thought back to the concept of lower decks, and I've always been. We've referred to all these other SG units, and we have lots of other people working in Stargate Command. What about them? And how do you become qualified? All of a sudden, they're going to pull you out of the ranks of the military and say, "Hey, there's other worlds out there, and we're going to now start sending you to those other worlds." What's the process of getting them up and ready for it? And so I came up with that concept of pulling together 4 characters. And Haley, we had introduced as a character before in a previous episode. I can't remember the name of it, but she worked out.
Prodigy.
And so I thought, well, bring together some other characters. Where did these characters come from? Well, Grogan was named after Steve Grogan, who was a quarterback of the New England Patriots. Satterfield was named after Esther Satterfield, who was a soul singer in Rochester, New York, where I used to live. And the character Satterfield was originally supposed to be black. I wrote her as black, and falling in love with Daniel. But they cast Grace Park, who was so great in the part.
Fantastic.
And when I watched the episode, I was like, oh, Grace Park is 15. What is she doing in this episode?
Yeah.
It looks so
She's
young.
A kid.
And then Elliot was named after, if you know the Canadian kids show, Elliot Moose. My daughter was 5 when I was up in Canada working on Stargate, and every day she'd watch Elliot Moose. And Elliot was in my house every day. And so Lieutenant Elliot came from that. So that's how they got their names. And I just thought the other thing too about Lower Decks that the producers really liked was that it was a pretty inexpensive show to produce, because it was mostly all standing sets. So all the drama took place on sets that were already constructed. They already lit them. They already knew how to do them. So this was not a big deal. And it's shows like that are a gift to the showrunner, because they basically save the budget, because they can then spend budget money on their more elaborate projects that require more special effects, more set building, and more location shooting and things like that. Proving Ground was dead cheap. It was a very cheap episode because most all of it took place at Stargate Command. We had a couple things that the company moved, but just to a warehouse facility, and that was a pretty inexpensive thing. No major construction or anything like that. And I wrote the script about putting together the new crew, where the new crew is going to come from. And I wanted to tip it to the fans pretty early on that it was a test. And I think we did that successfully. O'Neill revealed pretty early on he wasn't really shot. And so I think the fans watching it kind of were ahead of the crew, because Elliot and all the kids thought this is all real, at least most of the time they did, and yet the fans would be onto it, and I thought could enjoy it from that standpoint of, hey, we're putting these kids through the ringer, and getting them ready for reality, getting them ready for what might really come out there in the real world. And it sailed through production, and I remember Rob saying, God, this is the first of our scripts that went through with white pages. Apparently a lot of pages just came off my computer and went into production without a lot of changes. And there was also another irony in the thing too, is that when I moved from LA to Burnaby, I live in West Vancouver, I had to rent out my house in LA. The person I rented to was Elisabeth Rosen. Not knowing that I would be working with her. It's like, well, you're going up to Canada? I worked on a show in Canada. Yeah, which one? Stargate. Oh my God, you got to be kidding. And so I rented my house to Elisabeth Rosen and her, I think, a husband. And they were in our house while I was in Canada. And so that was the other thing too.
Small world.
When they came to cast the characters, or when they came to putting together who was going to be in it, they suggested Haley to me. And I said, oh my God, I know where she is. She lives in my house. So she'll be easy to track down. we brought her up, and then the episode really came together very quickly, and I think without much of a hitch. It went through production, and I was just thrilled with it. I met the kids, and I got a picture taken with them. Me and my cast. I think the only one in the part that's not in that picture is Grace Park. But
Grace Park is, I showed it
I
earlier.
like the episode a lot, and
No,
again,
this is
worked out for me.
This is really solid. I enjoy doing this with writers, and I'm interested to see how you respond. Can I share my issue with this episode?
Please.
The entire command is brought to a grinding halt to train these guys. That would be very expensive.
Mm-hmm. Militarily.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Was this something that you perceived as happening all the time, or this intense for this specific group of people to bring them into a situation?
I would think that it would be like a once a month kind of thing, where production shuts down. The normal SG operation shut down for
so certain
days.
Floors are shut down, and they bring these recruits through.
Yeah, because they need to bring in new blood. They're continually stocking new SG teams. And they need to put them through the paces before you can send them off world. I mean, and I thought this was a good way to do it. And that's, the tricky thing was coming up with the concept of, well, they can only use training guns because they can't use real guns because there are real people. You don't want to kill them.
Yeah.
And then the guns that they get are the blanks, and you don't know if you shoot a guy with a blank if he's really shot or not, unless you go examine the wound. They didn't have time to do any of that stuff. So I think that Stargate Command would do this from time to time to bring in new people. As I'm sure you have military drills all the time on military bases that are not real, but they're perceived to be real in order to get people ready for combat. So. That's
absolutely true. For sure. Can we speak on the Sentinel for a second?
Yeah, the Sentinel is, to me, it's a disappointment. Here's my take on it, and the two characters that we brought in, Kershaw and Greaves, I wrote them far more sympathetically, and the reason I wrote them, and I think that was the objection that Brad had with my draft of the script. And he told me, man, you love these people too much. And now by that time, I wasn't really prepared. I wasn't really in a position where I could say, hey, come on, they got to be this way. But my feeling was that Kershaw and Greaves worked for a bad guy. They worked for Mayborn. They didn't work for Jack O'Neill, and my whole concept is, as they were established in the previous episode, they were not villains. They were people who worked. They were under the command of a bad person. They were under command of William Calley, somebody like that, and Milai. It wasn't their fault that they got drafted into this operation of pilfering alien technology. And so when we came to them, my feeling was they weren't going to be such jerks about it. They were going to be looking for vindication. That, hey, you mean we get to go back and fix that thing that we screwed up? Thank God. Maybe here's our chance to prove that who we are. So my whole take on them was different from what ended up in the episode. And that's my disappointment in the episode, is that they're jerks. Right from Greaves is jerk, Kershaw, they're jerks. I didn't want them to be jerks.
For sure. No,
my feeling was how this relates back to the SG-1 team is that I wanted Daniel and Samantha and Teal'c or whatever at a certain point to there, but for the grace of God go I. Thank God we got we got General Hammond and we got Jack O'Neill. We're now working for a schmuck like Mayborn. That was my concept of how it affected our people. It's like, oh, thank God we got leadership that we can believe in, and we do. I mean, we have good, solid leadership and Stargate Command, but not every Stargate team had good leadership, and that I thought that was what I really wanted to show. And what ended up becoming way too much about the planet and the problems on the planet. I wanted to make it more about our people, and like I said, Brad said, "God, man, you love these people too much," and I guess I did. I thought after Proving Ground, like I'm looking after the little guys a little more than I should have, and I think that was my my undoing on that episode.
Well, it's an interesting argument. Let's unpack that for a second here. First, I've got to know, it's the only episode that I can think of where, yeah, actually it is. It's the only episode where the previously on is used to back sell footage from a previous episode that was newly filmed for the characters that the cast that you had to play in this new episode, but didn't actually exist in that episode. Was this originally scripted for Tobias and for Newman to come back? And those, or did you originally write this?
That was my plan. Yes.
Yeah. But they just weren't available.
I guess that was, I can't really honestly remember the cast.
I think that's the case. I think Christian Boucher was not available for that episode. So, but I think that would have been a great take, because it would have continued that story, even though it really is from the overall larger team. But Jack is on record as saying, he's a Cold War veteran, Black Ops. He had to do quote unquote damn distasteful things for the government. We know that he's killed people. And you've got this situation where, what's worse, killing people or stealing from allies, and so he's kind of high and mighty in this episode. I'm kind of with you on this.
Thank you.
But the
other thing too, honestly, about the episode that was an issue, that is, I turned in a script, and then I had a planned. The company went on vacation, and I came back from vacation, and I didn't really get to argue my case before the script went into final revision, and that's the story, because I was out of town. But it was planned, but it just they came back, and next thing you know, it was going in a different direction. But that happens on TV. But this is, I can't say I hate the episode. I just say I was disappointed that some of my ideas for this one didn't get realized as clearly as some of my ideas on previous episodes did. So,
and
that's that.
And also, it's an interesting observation. And the fact of the matter is, you can't die on every hill, nor should you. But yeah, no, it's. I enjoy both of the ideas that were presented and the one that was executed as well. Sight Unseen. I forgot to
mention the idea that I wanted to mention during Proving Ground. That was something that I was just so impressed by and just loved every day I was working on cast or on the crew of Stargate. Was the set was contiguous. That I had never ever seen that before on a television show. You go on the Enterprise, and you got the bridge over here, you got Picard's office over there, you got it's all different parts of the Paramount lot, sometimes different buildings. You walk into Stargate, it's like you're in Stargate Command. The briefing room looks out over the gate room. Below, you walk down the staircase from the briefing room, you're in the main command center, and these hallways are off that. I mean, it's like you're in Stargate Command and it's right there next to the production office. And so I would often spend time when I'm thinking of ideas for the show on the set in the gate room. I spent a lot of time in the briefing room. I wrote episodes. I probably wrote Proving Ground in the briefing room
upstairs.
I had a very small Giornata computer that I was able to write on very fast, and I wrote probably most of that episode in the briefing room, because I just you're on the set, you just absorb it, and it's just there. It's just wonderful. And I've never seen a production built like that before. That it's just, you walk into that set, you're in Stargate Command.
It keeps on going.
It's real.
I agree.
So that was one of my favorite observations about working on the show and working on that particular episode.
Sight Unseen is an interesting idea. And I'm interested to hear you pitch it from your perspective. Tell us about the nugget for Sight Unseen, which you co-wrote with Damian Kindler.
Yeah, the difference for me is I was no longer on staff. What happened was the show switched from Showtime to Sci-Fi, And
That's
one
right.
of the unfortunate things about me is that I was an American writer and I had an American union called the WGA that was different from the WGC, the Writers Guild in Canada. And I think my pay was higher than some writers on staff. And so it was probably easier when the budgets were cut to say goodbye to the American writer. So I was no longer on staff, but they said, we want a relationship. Please write for us and submit ideas. And so, Sight Unseen and and Covenant were both slightly different because I was no longer as connected to the show. I was off here back in LA. I was doing other things, and I basically pitched them an idea that I thought would be a cool idea. What if you bring back this machine, and it shows you what's at first you think it's releasing monsters into your environment, but it's really just showing you stuff that's already there that you just don't know is there. And that became a really interesting concept, and that's really the core concept of the episode. It's really a gimmick episode to me that doesn't really get at the, some of the ethical things that I like to get at in an episode. So it's a good episode. I enjoyed it. It was a paycheck.
For
I
sure.
don't
No,
have a,
and
I
it's
don't have a personal connection to it like I do to the others. Though I got to be honest with you. It was okay.
I like it in the fact that with these little gelatinous orbs in our heads, we see a very, very limited range of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah.
And what else do we coexist with that we don't perceive?
Right. The idea of other dimensions existing, the parallel to our the five that we have or whatever.
Yeah, that we're aware of for sure.
Yeah. So that was really where that came from, and I thought it played with that idea, with that concept. The guy, I can't remember the character's name.
Jonas?
He was originally supposed to be a little bit more of a goober.
Oh, you're Vernon Sharp.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Vernon.
He was a little bit sharper than I originally intended him to be. But again, it played out okay.
Yeah, his mother was awfully interesting too.
Yeah.
She was a real floozy, that one. Oh gosh.
And this scene really didn't mean anything. I mean, that was just such a filler of a scene. It didn't lead anywhere. We learned nothing. It's just like, well, we got to fill, the pages, but somehow something.
That's the thing. Covenant is one. I am privileged to know Charles Shaughnessy. He loves this character. Mm-hmm. We had him on earlier this year when there was a chance that Stargate was going to be coming back. He was actually one of the ones that I had hoped would return in some way because this character is dangling out there somewhere in the universe.
Yeah.
He loved the character from a perspective of a man who is willing to go after the truth at absolutely any cost. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those, especially in the world that we live in now, when the Musks and the Bezoses and all of those folks have come into much more prominence. If you had someone who worked in aerospace or had something to do with this program, and they found out about more than they might, generally get their hands on. Yeah. How far would someone go? Tell us about creating Covenant with Robert.
Well, that really was the concept, is that, we had a character. I think it was before Elon Musk was really prominent. I think we based him more on Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, those type of characters.
Howard Hughes.
Elon Musk, certainly the same kind of character, absolutely. And I just thought, these are smart guys, and what if they're, they got feelers out there, they got technology out there that's working constantly. How can we be doing all this stuff and not having it seen by them? And I really love the idea of cloning, a clone, cloning a clone and creating an Asgard and not really knowing what you've got, but holy shit, we just created this thing. It grew in 3 or 4 months, and what the hell's this about? And so that's where it came from. And I thought, this guy is like putting it to us, like, fess up, tell us the truth. And meanwhile, that's the dilemma for our team, is like, hey, we got to keep it quiet, because if the rest of the world really knew what we were up to, all hell would break loose, and all of a sudden we'd be under scrutiny that would not allow us to really do the work that we do. And so that's the dilemma. with Coulson, and I thought it was well cast. I was a little closer to this episode than I was sight unseen. I wrote the teleplay with Rob on this one, and it's I think it's a strong episode. Uh, I like the guy. I like the fact that he was a little bit reckless and very full of himself. And uh,
Mm.
and and I also thought that the whole company thing was executed beautifully in production. The logo, the look of the company, the interaction of his team with him. They were kind of like afraid of him, and yet, he was always in command. He was always in charge, and kind of felt strongly about what he was up to. The fact that his best buddy from the old days was his business partner, and was compromised, and I thought it had a lot of really good things going for it, and I thought the episode, the guy thinks he's lost, to the world, and well, maybe there's another way out, and I thought that ending was very fitting for him.
It's a great
Liked
ending.
it, liked it.
This is not to throw any shade at Charles Shaughnessy, he did a great job, but Tom O'Brien as his best friend and business partner, Brian Vogler, the performance from this guy was strong because he's a cornered animal in most of this episode, and his best friend is so dead set on pursuing the truth that he's ignoring all the warning signs that his friend is throwing off about his company and about himself.
Yep.
And when it all comes crashing down at the end, it's a great scene between Amanda and Charles where he's like, I missed this. I killed this guy.
I know. Yeah, and again, the moral question was not really with us as it was as much with Coulson, but still, it was a strong ethical dilemma that we were in as well as he was in. And so, again, that's what I like to write, is I like to put people in difficult situations because that's what life is about, is getting in and out of those tough situations that we all find ourselves in, and I think that's the essence of drama.
What responsibility do we as private citizens have to the truth when we're exposed to information like this? One of the things that that Charles spoke at length when he came on was the possibility, the greater and greater likelihood that our own politicians are hiding evidence that that has now in some cases been introduced into official record in the U.S. Senate. That something is going on beyond our world, that some kind of visitation or engagement is occurring. What responsibility do we as citizens have to getting the truth out of that?
Again, that's a really difficult moral question, is because I think that in some sense there are things that are better not revealed to all of us. If we knew everything that was going on in negotiations between our government and the country of Iran, I don't think we need to know everything, to know what the truth is. I think some things are better. We hire them to make those tough decisions.
That's
and
true.
The weight of the world is on them to make those tough decisions. Let them deal with it. And, as long as our decisions are left in the hands of people that are responsible, I think it's okay. It's okay that we don't know everything. I do think, this like current trend of declassifying the UAP, UFO, whatever you want to call them. I think it's a great thing to classify that stuff and put it out there, and then let more people investigate it. That's fine. The more we know about the bad guys like Epstein, I think that's a good thing for the population. But I don't know what we know. We need to know everything that's going on in and of the moment. Some things we hire these people to be responsible, our political leaders and our whatever, to make those tough decisions. And the weight of the world is on them. And I don't know that we all, as a populace, are capable of voting the right answer. It's better sometimes just to say, okay, you got the gig. General O'Neill or General Hammond or Colonel O'Neill.
This is what we pay you the big bucks for.
This is what we pay you the big bucks for. And make those calls, and I think that's okay. But again, the point of view of a guy like Coulson is, hey, I've uncovered this stuff, and I'm not going to just sit on it. I'm going to force them to tell the truth, and I think that's important too.
Yeah, and the fact that you gave him a father with a reporter background, I mean, that
Yeah,
really
yeah.
you go back and you rewatch that episode and it completely tracks. It's like
Hmm.
you totally get that this guy believes that absolute transparency is key, and there are consequences for that.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I'm not going to get into it too much, but there is some pretty damning evidence for a number of folks related to Island Guy and a number of people who are in play in a number of organizations today. And I can't remember where it was that it came out, but like someone was basically saying, look, there are a number of important people, prominent people that we can't disclose were involved in that, because if we did, the entire system would come undone. And it's like,
Right. Right.
wow.
Yeah.
Who are we protecting?
Hmm. Yeah, the
So,
only thing about the episode I think could have been stronger is the involvement of the trust,
yeah.
because they were the hidden hand in the episode. And I know that was something that the show was playing with over time, and they didn't want to reveal too much at this this juncture of the production. And I think that could have been stronger in the episode to be a little bit more of a threat to Coulson
Hmm.
than it really turned out to be. But other than that, I think it was a pretty strong episode.
I have a similar tangential question in relation to that from Between Two Fires that I accidentally skipped over. Between Two Fires brings back Tanith, who was now working for Anubis at this point. He wasn't introduced as the big bad guy until later on in the season. So was this a case of you introducing Anubis as a threat, or them saying, okay, we've got this guy coming later on, let's go ahead and bury this through Tanith in this episode?
That's a question that I can't even answer.
Okay. It's a little too fuzzy, too far back, David.
No, well, it's the interplay of the Goa'uld and who was doing what at what time was not really my métier. It was not something that I was just much involved in. That was Brad and Rob, and that was what they were dealing with, of all those relationships between the system lords, and I just sort of was in my cards at the time.
There you
So,
go. I have a number of fan questions for you. Do we still have
sure.
some time with you?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure. Go
perfect.
ahead.
Lockwatcher wanted to know what was different about writing for Trek as opposed to Stargate. My understanding was Star Trek was like every single word had to be exactly correct. Is there any truth to that?
Oh, I don't think the actual writing experience is much different, to
Oh,
be honest with you. It was perhaps, um, it was no, it was really not much different. The process was a little different. Let me explain the process because I think the fans would probably be interested. On Star Trek, we would write the pitch. The pitch would be accepted, and then you would write what's called a story outline, which I explained earlier. Some people call it treatment. It's basically you tell the story in paragraph form. If you go on Wikipedia and read the plot outline of any movie, that's similar to what we'd do on Trek. We would write a plot outline or a story outline, and then we would go into what's called a break session. Now, we don't do that on Stargate. We did it in Star Trek. On a break session, the writer of the show would write out their own version of a beat sheet, and they would, what are the beats? How does the story progress? What's Act One? What's Act Two? What's Act Three? And then, but you would actually break the show in a group session. So you'd be there with the supervising producer or the exec producer. In that case, it was either Michael Piller or Jerry Taylor. They would run the meeting, and you'd be in the room, and the room is basically just a living room with couches and chairs. And on one wall was a whiteboard where an intern would actually take down the beats as you'd lay out the episode. So they'd say, Ron, what do you think is the first beat? Well, let's start in the transporter room and blah, 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 blah. Interior transporter room. And then what happens? Then the intern would write down what happens on that episode, on that scene. What's next? And then over a period of really it was just 2 days because we do half the show in one day and then the second half the next day. And then you take the beat sheet and you go home and revise the beat sheet and turn it into the script. That first process up to the beat sheet process is called story by. Beat sheet and script is teleplay by. Or if you've done both of those, story by and teleplay, it's written by. That's just under the way it's written out in Writers Guild. So that's the way they do it on Star Trek. Is you'd have a break session where you'd write the beat sheet, then you'd turn in the script from there, and then you'd get the rewrite, and you'd usually have one pass back at it before they rewrote you. Everything goes through the computer of the executive producer, the showrunner, before it goes into production. That's just standard on any TV show. On Stargate, it was a little different in that they wanted to go from the pitch. Once you had sold them the pitch, that's story value. You're already into the thing, and you don't really need to write a story outline. What you really need to do is beat sheet and then script. And so what we would do is, that's what you get the teleplay by. And in terms of compensation, 40% of your pay is story by, 60% of your pay is beat sheet and teleplay. And so that's the writing process is a little different on Star Trek or Stargate in that we would go story by, and you basically have the concept together, and then you're locked, you're a writer on that episode. And then they expect you to write the beat sheet and then the screenplay. And that's really the process is no different. Other than the break session, is you're kind of just on your own on Stargate. Is go to the beat sheet because the beat sheet for those guys was real important, and that's where you did a lot of the massaging of the script. Is you turn in the beat sheet, and like in Stargate or Star Trek, we do it in the room. We do that massaging in the room. Stargate, you do it after the fact, after the beat sheet was written and you turned it in. Then they go back, you'd have meetings about the beat sheet before you actually wrote the script. So the process was a little different, but the end goal is about the same.
Wow. All right. Well, I appreciate that information. Marcia
Sure.
Middleton wanted to know, you wrote Imaginary Friend on TNG.
Yes.
Where did that story idea come from? And did you have an imaginary friend?
I did not. My writing partner, Jean Mathias, that was her original concept. We were friends, we were in a relationship, and we were just brainstorming ideas, and that was one of them that we came up with. The whole process, becoming a TV writer was not easy. You go through this process of writing spec scripts and sending them out and getting no response, and finally we got our first spec script. Actually, I'll tell the story because it's interesting, I'm sure, to people who want to write for these TV shows. I had found I didn't have an agent at the time. I was doing all the legwork out of, after I started taking classes at UCLA Extension, I was really into it. I wanted to write. And so I kept writing. I wrote 2 original spec teleplays for Star Trek. And I found an agent, a secretary to an agent that was willing to send my stuff out to Star Trek. And sent it out, got rejected. And it encouraged me to write the second Star Trek script. Sent that out, got rejected. I didn't know at the time that if I had a third rejection, I would never be allowed back through their door again. I didn't know that. But between my second Star Trek script, I said, I got to start writing original screenplays. So I wrote several original screenplays, one of which got bought. And it was at the same time as we were pitching one of them got the interest of an agent. And the agent basically said, I've got a TV show, 30-something, that needs a writer. And they knew that I had worked in advertising. And he said, the show deals with advertising. Maybe you could write a TV script for them. So if you got anything, and I said, well, I have this old Star Trek script, one of my scripts. I said, I'll polish it up and get it to you. Well, by the time I sent it to him, 30-something had been canceled. So, well, that was worthless. And he said, why don't I send it to Star Trek? And I said, they've already rejected it. And he said, oh, no, it's all new people there now. Because this was the 3rd season of Next Generation, or 4th season. And everybody had been replaced. New showrunner, new everything. And I sent it to them, and they said, man, here you go. You got a pitch session. So we went in and pitched, and our pitches were way too long. They were basically like 2 pages, single spaced. And we got through like half reading of the pitch, and Jerry Taylor was like, stop, too much information. And so basically all our scripts got shot down. The second pitch we had was better, and we learned to tell the story in broad brushstrokes, not detail, not scene specific, but what happens, what are the ethical issues of the story, who's it involved, what are they going through, that kind of stuff. That's what TV shows want to see. And we were better, but we still didn't sell anything. And the third time, we walked into our agent's office. He said, okay, you sold your first screenplay. And this was for a script I had written called The Metal Man, which is basically the Super Bowl meets the Terminator. He said it was bought by Carolco Pictures. And he said, sit down, because you also sold your first story to Star Trek. And that was Imaginary Friend. And so that was where that came from. That was originally Gene's idea that I fleshed out and made into an Imaginary Friend. And there you go.
Wow.
It was a fun episode. My favorite
Gene
episode though, is
Roddenberry.
Lessons,
Okay.
because it's about music.
I
It's about
was.
Picard playing music.
I have been
If you
looking
go on my
forward.
website, you see a lot of music. You see me
Right.
playing with my bands, and I love music. It's part of my life.
And we've got a link in the episode description, folks, for Ron's website. I have been looking forward to talking with you about Lessons, which is one of my favorite TNG episodes. It might be my favorite Picard episode. I prefer it to The Inner Light, because I'm not all that. I enjoy The Inner Light, but it's got a lot happening in it. I love.
I never bought that he would accept that he's there, that he's on that planet.
No,
I never bought
yeah.
that. As much as I like the episode, as much as I like the part, that aspect of it in Star Trek lore, Picard.
I wonder
would
how much
figure
he
a
was
way
in
out.
control.
Yeah.
I wondered how much he was in control versus the probe was in control. It's like, okay,
that's a good point.
I'm here.
That's a
I'm
good
here to
point.
share this species culture and their history with you. You've got to get with the program here.
Yeah, it's like a dream. You're right. It's how much
Yeah.
in control of your dream are you? That's true. Okay,
and he's just
good
going to go
point.
back to work once he wakes up after 25 minutes. They're not going to
good
put him
point.
back to school for a little while and say,
Good
this are the protocols. All of this codes and everything you remembered is gone after decades.
I know.
But I love Lessons because it takes those pieces from Inner Light and this actress was extraordinary. If whoever you're going to have exactly against Patrick Stewart has got, he can't devour her in the scene, that she has to be able to go toe to toe with him. And this was a fantastic story.
Well, let me tell you the genesis of the episode, because I think
if I may first, before you get started with it,
Go ahead.
my favorite scene, she picks up the flute and she's like, it's absolutely beautiful. What is it? He says, they're not made anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like,
right.
oh, please tell me about Lessons.
Lessons happened. It was a gift in a way. I'll tell you. We had written our second episode for Star Trek that ended up being called an episode called Schisms, and that episode was about our crew being abducted off the Enterprise and being manipulated in alien.
Creepy as hell.
Creepy, and it was basically, based on the abduction stories of people claiming they were abducted into UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
That's where that came from. And it was our second sail to Star Trek, and we were supposed to do the whole Megillah, which is, as I told you, the story by and the teleplay by, which is the whole thing written by. And we were in the process, and we were just about to go into that break session, and we got a call from Jerry Taylor who said, I'm sorry, but the network bumped your episode up because it's an action-oriented episode, and we were going to be episode 13 or 14, and they said, now you're episode 5 in season 7 or season 6, I guess it was. And we got to give it to a staffer because you're new guys, we can't trust you to write the script. We said, oh shit, that's unfortunate. We, lost the opportunity. And she said, because she's a dear soul, she said, I'll give you a little hint of what might work around here. And she said, Michael Piller has this idea that Picard could become involved in an inter-office relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, we've given it to every member of the staff and nobody has done anything with it. So here you go. You're freelancers. What can you do with that episode? So we went off and we brainstormed. Just like, we've been thrown a bone. You don't want to not take advantage of it. And so we came up with all kinds of different ideas, and we came back to them, not with anything concrete, but all kinds of different ways of going. And we sat in a meeting. It was just Jerry Taylor and Ron Moore, Gene, and myself. And we started spinning all these different ideas, and they got into an argument. and we started saying, oh my God, it's over. Our dream of writing this episode is over because they were arguing over these various, well, he wants to do this, she wants to do that. And it's like, and I said, time out, please. Let us take the idea home and rework it and we'll do something with it. I said, okay, go ahead, go away, come back when you have it more together. And we were desperate, and we went out and we spent like $70, which is at the time was a huge bar tab at the Columbia Bar and Grill, and we're drowning our sorrows. And then over the next few days, just came up with an idea based on a painting. And if you go on my website and you look in the review section, I have a story about how Lessons was developed. And it was this painting that I had seen in various antique shops. It's from the late 1800s. It's called the Kreutzer Sonata. And it's a painting of a man and a woman, and she's a violinist and he is a pianist, or other way around. She's the pianist, he's the violinist. And they're kissing. And they're obviously in the midst of playing music because her hand's still on the keyboard and he's still holding the violin. And what's obvious is what's happening in that scene is they're so overcome with music. They're so overcome with the passion of the music that they can't help but express it directly. And so they're kissing. And I thought, cool, this is my door in music. And I had seen Picard play that Rustikian flute in that previous episode of Inner Light. And I thought, this is my door into the episode. So I came in with that. I said, she's a musician. He's fascinated. She wants to teach him. She learns he plays. Let's play together. Because as I said, I'm a musician. I know performance. I know that when you get into something with other musicians and it's really cooking, there's a bond. There's an energy between you as people, as musicians. You're in a higher plane. And I knew that was something I could play with in this episode. So I said, let's bring in Nella Daren. Let's make her a musician. Let's make her a brilliant scientist. And all of those things Picard is going to be appreciative of. Oh my God, there it is.
Yeah.
That's the painting. That was, and what happened? We go to that one moment where they've been playing music together and she decides, oh, I'm going to find the most acoustically perfect place on the
Jeffrey's
ship,
tube,
crawling through one of the Jeffrey's tubes. And I thought, cool, let's put it there. Let's bring them together. And then what happens? They're playing music, and then we cut to the comedy in the engineering with Geordi says, do you hear something?
Yeah, exactly.
You're hearing music? And Data comes up, and Data, no, I don't hear anything. And then you cut to them, and what is it?
They're
it's
kissing.
The Kreutzer Sonata. And so that's where that episode came from. It came from a painting. And so this is art imitating art. I don't know, or art imitating life, imitating art. But that's where that whole episode came from. And then, of course, the ethical issue, it's not Picard that is in physical danger. It's his emotional life that's in physical danger. Because what does he have to do? He has to send her out because she's got the solution. She's created this deflector array that might just forestall the firestorm and save the people in this outpost.
She has a job to do. She's got to do it.
And she connected all those things together, and she's the one that knows how to do it. I can't not send her into danger. And then, of course, when you think she's dead, where's Picard?
Oh.
This so beautifully filmed. They shoot this like Picard, like he's so tiny in his office, in his ready room, and then
he's slouching.
Gradually he walks to the camera, and then the camera brings up over the table, and on the table is the flute, which he closes the lid. What is it? It's so symbolically beautiful. I didn't write that. Okay, that was a moment that was created on the set, and yet here I am saying, I sure appreciate it. But and what is he doing? He's closing the emotional damage that he's going to feel.
Closing himself off. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that's
God.
That's that episode. And I love that episode. It's I have that right up on my website of how it came to be.
I don't have a TNG was something that I shared with my folks. I was 10 or 11 when that episode aired, and they tell me more than I remember that the three of us would get into bed, I think it was on Tuesday nights, and with a bowl of popcorn in the middle, with me in the middle, and we would watch Next Gen. And I remember watching that episode live for the first time when it aired, and she's not come back with the teams. Everyone else, the number of others have come back except for her. And I just remember sitting there with my folks thinking, oh, wow, this is heavy shit.
Yeah, I mean,
and then she stands there at the end.
Make it back. And we just felt that it was better if the way it ended, I thought the way it ended was very appropriate, and it was sad. It was touching and tragic, but it was appropriate for those two characters. And I'm so sorry to hear that Wendy Hughes had passed away a few years ago, but she was so terrific in that. And she apparently had worked with Patrick prior to that episode, so they knew each other, and that really helped the chemistry between them, which was phenomenal. And again, I like that episode. Proud of it.
Would Patrick have had, as the lead, any part in giving the green light to a specific actor in that point? Do you think they would have
Beyond
consulted
me,
him? Hey,
I don't
we're
know.
thinking. Okay.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I didn't have much to do, anything to do with that. But again, sometimes you just get lucky in some episodes.
Yeah.
Like some of the episodes I had most of the episodes I had for Stargate. I feel very fortunate to be a part of that team, because I have nothing but positive things to say about Stargate. I have very positive memories. Obviously, I'm still working with Rob Cooper, 25 years after we first met, and love his writing. He was my favorite writer on the show. Like the other guys too. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, absolutely. But if don't fix something that isn't broken. If you got something, a working relationship or a connection with someone, that you can have magic with, it's not always easy to have a connection with someone creatively where the two of you just get invested in one another and the juices just start flowing creatively, and when you come across that person, that's great.
Well, I hit that show, I think, at the right time too. I think everything was really coming together at that season 5. The cast, as I said, was coming together. All of the people behind the scenes. I didn't mention Peter DeLuise was also just a joy to work with. Wonderful guy, brilliant writer, and just one of the funniest guys I think I've ever met. Just working with Brad, Rob, Joe, and Paul, and those guys. Kathy Ann was wonderful, and the production team. They were just great folks to work with. And I hit them at the right time. I hit them when the show was hot, and I feel I got to contribute to that heat.
Absolutely. No, season 5 is one of my top 3 easily. Lockwatcher, did you have any issues with getting Dr. MacLaren's name on screen? Because a lot of times legal, it bumps and they won't actually use it.
They didn't question it. They didn't actually ask where it came from. I cast that actor. It was one of my few casting decisions on the show, and I got to sit on the casting. And he was in there for some other part on the show, and I said, "No, he'd be perfect for MacLaren," and he worked out pretty well for that. And Maclarium, that whole just sailed through without a bump. And I don't think anyone knew that I had actually used the name of my friend Duncan MacLaren as the. It just was a name, sometimes you just throw names out there and there they go.
It's news to us. I have a small story about that character. My ears always perk up with the music, and I always loved Joel's themes. And when I was watching season 5, I saw this episode when Showtime was having its free week of programming because my parents stopped paying for it, and I didn't have the money at the time to pay for the show. But when he comes into the SGC, Joel has this swell of music, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is a returning character. Yeah. Joel is playing it up like this guy's walking through the door, and I went back and rewatched the older episodes. I'm like, this guy never came up before. And when the writer, with the executive producers and the creatives are spotting the session with Joel, I was always just curious as to why that particular music cue was selected that way, because I was always left with the impression as an audience member that this guy was previously in the series in some way. So
yeah, it beats me. I don't really know. I just it's again another one of those moments that you just feel fortunate to be a part of as a writer, because as a writer you're kind of removed. You're involved, but you're also removed to some degree. But it's I
absolutely
what it's about.
Let me see here. Where was this? Semp FT667. I apologize if I'm butchering that. Any other moments from the set of the show that stand out to you before we wrap that you want to share? The writers don't often go down to set, so any memories that you guys have from that, I would be really interested in.
Well, it's I didn't really. The only actual. Well, I saw some of the shooting on Proving Ground, or on Proving Ground. Yeah, I was
Hmm.
in part of Wormhole Extreme. I was in a
Exactly.
couple of those moments. Were kind of fun. I, writers don't normally go on set, but I got to be honest with you. There was not a prohibition on it like there was on Star Trek. Star Trek, they didn't
There
really involve
was.
writers. Yeah, the writers were not really involved in on set. The showrunners were, but most of the writers were not. If you're a little higher in the food chain, yeah, but most writers, and I went on set on Star Trek once, but it was for an episode I didn't write. It was just really to, you know, throw me a bone and say, you want to come and see a scene being filmed, and I
What
was
is
there.
that? Is that
Why?
to get your work done? I mean,
I think that they want to keep writers writing, and they
keep you
just,
going.
you know, yeah, and also, it's not like you want to bring the writer in on the consultation of a line reading. You want that's between the director and the actor. The writer's work is done at that point. So,
Hmm.
that's really that.
Okay. Drunken Deer. Have there been uh, any issues where I want to interpret this because this is a valid question. Drunken Deer wants to know: were there any circumstances where you had written something and it came out fairly differently edited in terms of something that you had done on Stargate?
There probably were, but I'm not
Yeah.
really thinking of them.
Okay.
Those things kind of blur together. I do
Yeah.
remember one. I remember a moment on this is a totally different story, but
It's
it's
okay.
similar topic. I remember my first when we were writing lessons, we went into the break session, and I just I really strongly disagreed with the teaser, and I was so upset about how that wasn't me. I had a whole different way of bringing those two characters together, Picard and Nella, and I was
She's
so
working in
upset
stellar
by it.
cartography, and they're it's overnight.
Yeah,
So just wanted to establish
and
that.
I just had a whole different take on it, and I remember going home from the first break session and thinking, I can't do this. There's no way. This is like, it's not my writing. I don't feel good about it. And then I slept on it. I thought, what the hell am I thinking? This is television. You know,
That's
get
right.
over it. Get over yourself, and listen to the fact that other writers are giving you ideas that might improve your story. It was a very big learning lesson for me in the episode. And after that, and so that's why, when someone asks the question of did things turn out really differently, my memories of most of these, but for like what I explained about the Sentinel, of having a different take on those actors, generally over time you just kind of like, oh, the one you watch, that's my thought. That's pretty much what came out on my computer. No, and of course it isn't. Things get
For
changed by
sure.
lots of other different people along the way, but you make peace with it as a writer, and you learn to live with whatever is on screen. And that's kind of the benefit of it, is that hindsight, you don't always need the reading between the lines of what always happened, of how my line reading was different from this character's line reading. I told you I can remember like the scene in the church in Red Sky was a lot more comedic than the way it played out on screen. But that's, most of the time what I thought should happen happened. Now, it may not have been exactly the way I had envisioned it, but you're working with other creative people who are also good. These people did not get to be where they are because they're incompetent. They got to
That's
be
right.
there, and they didn't get there through politics. They didn't get there by playing political games, or like sucking up to the teacher. They got there because they happened to be people with good ideas, and you got to respect that, and you learn from that as a writer. And that's, to me, that's something I've learned over time that has done me well over the years of being able to continually work in the business.
I'm curious, how did the captain and commander originally meet in your estimation? What was your original plan?
Oh,
Not barging
see,
in on
that's
stellar
that's
cartography, blowing
exactly
the
it. I can't even remember that now. That's the point. Is that I have now absorbed what happened on that episode into my collective imagination of like, oh, that was mine, yeah. But I'm telling you, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was Jerry Taylor's concept of they meet in conflict. They meet in him trying to do things and her forestalling him doing those things whenever he wanted, and him saying, "What the fuck? What's going on down there?" And
No, it's
going
just
down.
terrific. He's such
Yeah.
what a curmudgeon. He's an older guy. He has exactly his certain way of doing things, and then this woman just comes out of nowhere, a subordinate to him, and saying, "No, you're doing that all wrong."
Yeah. I did want him to be surprised by her as a musician, and that played, because they meet one way, and then the next scene you see him tend forward, and she's playing piano brilliantly, and he's like, "Whoa, this person I just saw is like fascinating beyond my imagination." So that is important, and that was part of my introduction to them as well.
Just
now,
wow.
I do want to make, this is not an advertisement, but I do want to say that if you're interested in screenwriting, if anybody out there is interested, I've been a screenwriting instructor at UCLA Extension now for many years, and I do teach a class, and I'm starting a class in September on screenwriting. So if anybody wants to learn from me over 10 weeks, I teach it online, and it's like this, a Zoom class, as well as me giving you printed lectures that you read, as well as filmed examples, and me reading your work. And you, over the period of 10 weeks, you develop a story outline for a story you want to do. So if anybody wants to learn from me, I don't teach often, but I am teaching, I believe it's starting in September. So check the UCLA Extension catalog, and there you go.
Is that something that you would be willing to do a first lesson or a sample lesson with us in the not too distant future to give people a taste of this, of what you would offer?
Maybe. Yeah, I could do something like that.
I'll be very interested. Yeah.
Could we do a situation where I have a printed, like a story outline on screen with me on screen
Absolutely.
at the same time? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, we could do something like that.
I'd be very interested in promoting that with you.
Yeah, because a lot of I started out as a fan and became a writer, and I know a lot of a lot of fans want to become writers. So I thought I'd offer that, and it's out there. So yeah,
absolutely. Christina Graziella, Ron, do you think we'll ever actually encounter alien life?
No, I don't believe in aliens. I don't.
You don't?
No.
Okay. All right.
No,
there we
go.
go.
It's fiction. So it's, I'm religious. I believe in God. I believe in the spiritual life. I believe in other dimensions of reality. But aliens, no.
That's interesting. I am religious as well, and there was an interesting line in the Disclosure Day where there's a nun who speaks to one of her former nunlings, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure the technical term, but she specifically talks about the Bible only referring to life on Earth. Mm-hmm. The heavens and the earth, you could interpret that a number of different ways. Mm-hmm. So there's
a book I just finished. It's a really interesting book. It's a guy by name of Hugh Ross. I don't know if you've heard of Hugh Ross. He's a scientist who's also a religious theologian, and he wrote a book called Little Green Men, something like that. Little Green Men and something. And it's a fascinating examination of the evidence that we have about UFOs up to this point. And, he takes a scientific view of the fact that life is only here. Mm-hmm. His belief is, and it's very convincing, and it's got me thinking that maybe it is. Maybe we're only here.
Have you read Robert J. Sawyer's Calculating God?
I have not, no. Science
fiction novel, Canadian author. Highly recommend it to anyone who's listening. Ron, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
Sure.
I will be in touch, emailing you, and let's see if we can have you back really soon.
We will be in touch, and when we are, we'll talk about that project that Rob and I are working on.
I can't wait to hear more about it.
It's a great story, and it's, like I said, it's something that I can't get out of my system. We sold it, and if you don't sell it, if it doesn't go all the way through, a lot of times you just put it away. And I said, this is too good a story to be shelved. This guy's a fascinating guy. Hollywood in that era was so interesting, and it's so much more interesting than it is today. I'm reading on a regular basis. I read the Hollywood Reporter from 1932, 33, 34, and it's just such a much more interesting time. And you read the Hollywood Reporter and Variety today, and they're just fan mags. They're not. They say nothing hardly ever about the ins and outs
No,
of the
they're
industry.
terrified.
And
Yeah.
yet,
They
in
don't
the
want to get
old
into it.
days, everything was out there. If somebody went on a trip, somebody sneezed, somebody got a cold, that was in the Hollywood Reporter. You learned about it. Someone was dating, it was all there. And who was making what film, whether there was going to be a good film, whether, filmmaking and filmmakers were so much more present in the old days than they are now. I mean, now we have a few that are out there, the Tarantinos and people like that, Martin Scorsese, what have you. You have a lot of big filmmakers, but the ins and outs of the business being exposed on a daily basis, like it was back then in the Hollywood Reporter, has just never happened since. It's not there. And so it's a fascinating time and a fascinating story. And so many great movies came out of that era. I'm a huge, huge fan of the 1930s, Frank Capra movies, Alfred Hitchcock movies, John Ford movies. I mean, why aren't we making those kind of movies now? And so much of what we're making now isn't good, unfortunately. I love the Game of Thrones. I love the House of Dragons, the Light of Seven Kingdoms. Those are all things that are working for me. But so much of what I see now isn't really up to that. I watch those old Stargate episodes, and they're so much better than what I'm watching, nowadays on TV. And I'm not just talking about my own writing. I'm talking about the quality of that show, quality of Next Gen, the quality of Stargate SG-1. It's good stuff, and it's worth continuing. I was so sorry to hear that they aren't doing a new show. I saw your podcast that I had heard from Rob that Martin Joe was going to be running a new show, and he was excited about it for Martin, and they chose not to do it. That's the story?
Yeah, they chose not to do it 2.5, 3 months before it was going to go before cameras.
Oh.
The spaces were all booked out in the UK where they were going to go and film it. Nathan Crowley, who was the production designer for The Odyssey. He's Christopher Nolan's films. He was on board. ILM was on board to do visual effects, and then it's we're still licking our wounds over here on that one. Could probably be for a while.
In sympathy, I was looking forward to the show because I knew Martin briefly when we worked together on Stargate or on SG-1. But the concept of Stargate is a great concept, deserves to be continued. And,
exactly.
But Star Trek is not what Star Trek used to be either. So
these modern television, I don't know if it was Rob or someone who mentioned to pitching to Netflix, and Netflix was like, you have to completely rewrite this because every scene the characters have to talk about what they're doing for people who are not paying attention to the screen, for the people who are doing the dishes or on their iPhones. And it's like they don't trust. No one is allowed to trust the audience anymore to have conflict. Just wrong, man.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it. Well, on that delightful
note, a lot of good stuff to watch.
That's right.
Filmed previously, and we can always hope for more, and we can always hope for our new show, American Dreamer. We'll see what happens with that.
Absolutely. Well, I am thrilled to talk about it with you. I'm thrilled to have you on, and we will speak very soon. All right, sir.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure. I'm going to wrap up the show on this end. Take care of yourself, Ron.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That is Ron Wilkerson, writer and story editor for Stargate SG-1. My name is David Reed. You're watching the Stargate Oral History Project. If you enjoy the show and you want to see more content like this on YouTube, do click that like button. It does help with the show and will continue to help us to grow our audience, particularly commenting. That's a real big mover and shaker. If there's something that you enjoyed about this episode or didn't like, do me a favor and put that in the comments for the show. And it does encourage YouTube to share this with more Stargate fans. My profound thanks to my Patreon members. A few months ago, I had to switch gears. I wasn't able to continue to do the show for free after all these years. And so I reached out to you guys, and so many of you came through for me on Patreon. And I am so thankful every week that I'm able to bring you guys this show and get something back for continuing to produce it. Just so very thankful for all of you out there. And regardless of whether or not we're going to have a new show, a new Stargate show moving forward, you are still going to have more Dial the Gate content, because we aren't going anywhere. Thanks so much to Anthony, to Marcia, to Lockwatcher, to my mods for making this episode possible. I cannot emphasize enough just how important they are in the process for me creating these live streams week in and week out. Matt Eagle SG Wilson for his extraordinary opening sequences, along with Venture Pictures, James Young for creating a lot of this content as well. Frederick Marcoux at Concepts Web, he keeps dialthegate.com up and running. This was a great episode, and I really appreciate everyone who joined us live and asked your wonderful questions. We will have Ron back in the future, perhaps with Robert C. Yeah, that's what we've got for this episode. We've got one more scheduled live stream next week before I head out for San Diego Comic-Con. That's going to be Ben Robinson on July the 15th at 12 Pacific time. He's going to come on. He's from Master Replicas and going to talk to us about their new Serpent Guard helmet that they have available for purchase. So that one's going to be happening next Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific. Hopefully we can see you then. My name is David Reed for Dial the Gate. I appreciate you tuning in, and I will see you on the other side.